Joining me now is Arnaldo Cruz. He's the Director of Research and Policy Department at the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. Arnaldo, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start by getting your perspective on why civil service transformation was a priority for the government of Puerto Rico, and what were the benefits that you were after?
So just to provide a little context, the initial idea was from the government was not to do a civil service reform. That came afterwards after many conversations with government leadership. But the initial idea that the government had was to develop and implement new salary scales. And salary scales had not been updated in many years. The government felt that salaries were pretty low for a lot of public servants. So when we started having these discussions with the government, we felt like adjusting salaries is one part of the problem, but it really doesn't solve the perennial issues that persist in Puerto Rico around the civil service. So why don't we take this opportunity and use the salary scales as leverage to implement a broader civil service reform? So that's how the broader approach came to about. We had to really convince the government that we are going to do the salaries, but all these other things are very important as well in order to transform the civil service.
And in your transformation journey at the government of Puerto Rico, you decided to start with a pilot program as opposed to government-wide. Talk us through that decision.
Well, that was a very important decision because, as you know, this type of transformations are very complicated and very complex. And we have over 68 government agencies and the central government. So we felt that a pilot could allow us to test some of the approaches and some of the design elements that were put in place, which all the parameters of the reform, and allow us to learn from actual implementation in order to design the right approach for government expansion. So we actually finished the pilot like a couple of weeks ago. So we are now in that process of identifying those things that worked, those things that didn't. And I can tell you there were some things that they didn't work as well. So we are going to be making adjustments in order to have the model that best fit for government expansion based on actual lessons learned from implementation. So the pilot has been a big luxury that we have been able to have in order to build the right approach for the rest of the government.
You had to achieve buy-in for this pilot, not just from the government agencies that you worked with, but also from the workforce. What was your strategy there?
Yeah, so a lot of times when you start having these discussions about reform with the government, the conversation stays with heads of agencies and upper management or sort of the leadership that surrounds the head of the agency. So, we knew that in order for this reform to be successful, all employees needed to feel part of it, needed to understand why this reform was important for them, what it meant to them. Because at the end of the day, anything that requires reform requires implementation, and implementation is driven by the employees. So, it's not just driven by a great leader or a great head of agency. So we develop a very aggressive communications and engagement strategy that allow us to touch all different levels of the organization and allow us to have a more bottom-up approach to reform. And that proved to be a huge success. So, we done a lot of pulse surveying, throughout the project, and our biggest numbers are coming from employees at the different levels of the organization, at the lower levels of the organization. Those are employees that have felt more engaged, more excited about it, and that has allowed us to implement some of the reforming elements.
Well, let's talk about the reform process itself. You started with looking at your organizational design. What did you find?
So, I think part of the first task for us was for people to understand why org design or looking at org structures was important and how that was related to human resource management. I think that of all the elements in the pilot, that's the one that doesn't seem so clear that, hey, what does that have to do with HR? Like that's more like management or it's not really an core HR element. So the first thing we needed to do was to do a lot of awareness around the importance of org design and how org design ultimately ties to the way you manage your workforce. So once we were able to get the buy-in to include the org design and all the work that we were doing with the government, we were able to justify the need for org design with the stuff that we were finding at these agencies. And what we were finding at these agencies was that org structures had not been updated in many years. One of the agencies that we started working, the org structure the last time they updated the org structures was in the 1990s. So you had employees that were in divisions that no longer perform that work. You have employees that were reporting to multiple levels of the organization, no clear hierarchy or elements of supervision across the agency. So with the results, we were able to validate with the government the importance of reorganizing and updating work structures in order to be able to drive the other elements of the reform. So the implementation actually helped us validate that idea that we needed to do this first before we started talking about salaries and other elements of the reform.
Well, let's talk about salaries, because from there you got your compensation in line with the vision of the organization and the new job specifications that you had delineated. So talk about that process.
So that process was, as you know, that's in any reform that involves salaries, that's usually the most, the ones that get some more attention, because rightly so, it affects directly to the employee. So we wanted to, that's why the org design was so important, because we wanted to employees to understand that we were just not increasing their salaries. We were updating the org structures. We were making sure they had the right job and they were placed in the right place within the org structure. And then we did the salary stuff. So there was a benefit of that sequence in order for them to understand that a salary adjustment by itself was just not going to get the job done. So once we started working with the salaries, we found out, we did a lot of market analysis, used data on the local market, and we were able to identify that, in fact, a lot of employees were below market salaries in the local market in Puerto Rico. So we use a very creative approach where we compare the salaries to the market using labor surveys here in Puerto Rico, and then the employees that were above the market were not eligible for a salary adjustment, and only the employees that were below the market receive a salary adjustment. So that was pretty clear, and it was it seemed pretty fair to everyone that was involved, and that ended up about 75% of employees in the pilot receive a salary adjustment as a result of the market-based analysis.
And all this requires that you collect data and that you know how to use it effectively. You said that it helps you create an urgency around the agency that this reform really needed to be done.
Yeah, so I mean, data-driven decision making is it's a personal journey that I have had all in my career. The importance of data for making decisions. So part of our approach was to be able to create that sort of appreciation around data, and for agencies to see the value having data and using data for decision making. So that was the first thing. We wanted to create that appreciation for database and decision making based on data. And the second thing is that once we were able to show some of the data, particularly around the employee evaluation system, where we were using data to identify skill gaps across the board, the agencies were able to see, wow, how big these gaps are as far as skills, and we're able to get them to a point that we need to intervene now, because now we understand why we're having issues with certain tasks or activities at the agency. This is why we're relying on consultants so much, because once we're able to see the data so clear, it just opened their minds into the necessity and the need to be able to intervene now and not later.
This kind of reform takes time. What did you do to keep stakeholders engaged and on board throughout the process, especially as timelines tend to expand?
Yeah, so this is one of the most difficult areas of a reform, to keep engagement, particularly this type of reforms that are complicated and they usually take time. The pilot approach was the first thing, right? So being able to do a pilot allowed allow us to execute relatively quick, right? Not quick, just relatively quick in these two agencies that we're piloting that show the government that it actually was possible. So that was a key decision on keeping engagement and allowing the government to feel that this is actually going to happen. The execution of the pilot was a big help. The other thing is that, when you're doing this type of reforms, you have to be able to place the economic incentive, right? The carrot in this case was a salary adjustment, close enough in order for the government to feel that the benefit is going to happen relatively soon. If you put the salary adjustments too far in the process, then that's where you get into issues with fatigue and government, not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So at different times of the reform, we had to play with where we were placing the carrot, the incentive, because, when we were taking a long time with certain things, we were noticing that the government is getting fatigued and getting a little, antsy about certain things. So during the reform, we had to make strategic decisions to bring, some of those economic incentives sooner to avoid fatigue and to ensure the government understood that this was actually going to happen, and to get a little more momentum on the reform and not get stuck, right? So I think a key thing for a decision for a policymaker or for anyone who's working on reform is understanding where and when to place the economic incentive, not place it too soon, not place it too far. And if you place it too far, you have to be disciplined in order and be aware that you're going to have to make a change in order to avoid the work getting stuck on issues of the government not wanting to do that anymore.
So Arnaldo, the pilot program is done. What challenges do you foresee in scaling the program to all 65 government agencies?
Well, scaling is another of those very difficult things to do. Some of the things that we did in the pilot, we knew that there was going to be difficulty with scaling, but at the time we knew that it was important to show, that this was possible, right? And show what good looked like. So in certain areas, we knew that some of the things we needed to make an adjustment in order to find the right scalable approach when we were expanding this to the government. Some of the things from the get-go, we designed it in a way that we knew that they had the right scalable model, right? But in certain areas, we just knew that we needed a short-term win, and we didn't have time to design the element in a way that was scalable. And if we were to take that time, then we would have taken too long, and we were not being able to show success quickly in the pilot. So certain things we're going to have to make some adjustments in order to make some of the elements scalable, and some of the others proved to be well fitted for a scalable approach. So that's what we are in the process right now, just picking the areas that we feel work well and are a good fit for a scalable approach, and the ones that we're going to have to make some adjustments in order to make the solution scalable for the rest of the government. So, we knew that not everything was scalable, but we had to make decisions in the pilot that, that allows us to complete and be successful and show the government that this was possible and get momentum into this second phase, which is expansion to the rest of the government.
And Arnaldo, I just wonder how you feel about this whole process. Did it meet your expectations? Did it turn out how you expected when you started this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I haven't thought about that. You're just too busy sometimes working on the reform. But yeah, I think, looking back, I felt that when I look back at everything that we've done and the amount of people that told us that this was not possible, that we were not going to be able to do this, that the government was not going to cooperate, the government was not going to really work with us with this type of reform. This reform is too complicated, too complex. Once I look back on everything that we have accomplished, it certainly it gives you perspective of how much we were able to accomplish. Thinking about those beginning stages. So, I think I've been very surprised of our success. I have sort of, you always put your expectations at a place where you don't get frustrated if you don't reach those targets. But for the most part, I think we have hit our targets. In some cases, we have surpassed some of our own expectations about the reform. But that has obviously been the reason for that has been all the work that we've done and our ability to pivot when we needed to pivot and make decisions when we needed to make decisions. But overall, like, we all are at odds that this pilot has been successful and that the government is now excited about expanding this for the rest of the government.
And I appreciate you being on the program, Arnaldo. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the time.
Up next, we'll talk to an industry expert on how government agencies can achieve their workforce goals, including attracting Gen Zers to public service, getting buy-in from the unions, and retaining organizational knowledge. Stay with us.
The future of civil service is sponsored by EY. Learn more at ey.com/govpublicsector.
Joining me now is Erica Ford. She's a principal at EY. Erica, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the government of Puerto Rico just did this complete transformation of their entire workforce. That can seem very overwhelming to government agencies. Is this something that can be done in piecemeal, or does it have to be the whole thing to still be effective?
Absolutely not. You can't. The straight answer is you can do this in piecemeal. It really just depends on the priorities within your organization. The big piece that's most important is the change management. You know, change management is often something that folks think of as just communications, but it is not. It is training. It is grassroots leadership alignment. It is figuring out, like, you know, what are the right tools, the right messages to share with folks that is really going to move the needle for them.
Spell out for us why you think there's a need for transforming the civil service at this particular time.
We're at a time where there's tremendous catalyst events that are happening. You know, worldwide pandemic is certainly one for sure. But right now we're having such trouble. You know, some of the folks that I work with are just having so much trouble getting people in the door, getting the right talent in the door. And it's so critical because we're now at a moment where there are so many people that are eligible for retirement or will be eligible for retirement in the next 5 years or so. And so that knowledge is going out the door. So if you're going to start recruiting folks to come in and you're really tapping into that next generation, it's really thinking holistically about how you want that legacy of the folks that they'll leave behind for the organization. But it's also allowing the people there to really grow in their commitment through the investment that you make in them. And then you really have set up a standard for when, you know, your organization is ready to really receive new people coming in, that they're going to want to stay. And they're going to be really committed while they're there. So to make sure that all of those folks are really ready for whatever comes next, the unknown.
So we don't know what that next seismic, cataclysmic event is going to be. So how do you prepare for that? How do you recruit those workers for the future?
Yes. The thing that we really focus on and encourage folks to do is to create their perspective of what is the civil servant they need for their organization 5 to 10 years from now. Understandably, focusing on the now is so urgent, and there's so much pressure that comes with that, you know, with the various things that happen in the world. But taking a moment to stop and understand what are the core skills you want your civil servant to have. Right now, do they have the right level of common understanding and common understanding about what they need to do in terms of cyber? Do they have, are they working together in a really optimal way? How are they enabled from a technology perspective? What's their interaction like with the various constituents that they work with? And then at the same time, you know, do they feel like their whole person, their whole self is taken care of in such a way that they can deliver on the mission and be prepared? They're not so in this position of feeling like the investment isn't there. And with this, you can prepare them to bring their whole selves when something unexpected happens.
And that agility is going to be important so that they can pivot and respond. Well, we talked in an early segment about getting buy-in, and I want to ask you specifically about employee unions.
Yeah.
When you're making changes, it's not easy
Yeah.
for the workers, for lots of people. So what's the best strategy of getting them and keeping them fully on board?
In no way, shape, or form can anything happen in such a way that your unions feel like you are preventing them from protecting their employees. That comes with early notification. And it's not even just notification, it's actually early conversations. What's on the table? What are the drivers? Really having that kind of conversation is very important early on. The other thing that is also really important is to figure out the right moments that matter and what's most important in terms of that union rep's ability to continue to protect their employees. So getting common understanding between you and those union reps is so important. The other thing that also is really, really important is that don't sell yourself short. So a lot of organizations, sometimes they want to do something and it's going to be amazing and it has so much potential to bring amazing results. However, there's sometimes a fear of really talking about these big ideas. So part of it is figuring out how are you going to talk about the case for this change and honestly explain what we anticipate might be the impacts to particular employees. And then from that, have the joy of this is part of the socialization and the collaboration, and bring that to them, but do it from a place where you are empathetically remembering you cannot interfere with their ability to protect their employees. And from there, there's a lot that you can do to figure out what's the common ground to actually move the needle on progress. Now, it may hurt sometimes and be a little slow, but the point is, if you don't do it, it's not good for anybody.
I want to ask you about restructuring recruitment. It takes longer in the government than it does in the private sector, and there's not enough people applying. So what are the elements that go into a successful recruitment strategy?
So there's this concept of the more interactions that you have with a candidate, the more likely they're going to accept the offer. So, it's for some folks, and I understand there's so much volume, it can kind of sometimes be transactional. And so really not allowing yourself to forget the relationship building part of that recruiting process. And so it may mean that, yes, as a recruiter, you're certainly going to get to know them and that kind of thing. But who else can be part of that process of, kind of motivating that candidate and helping them see the value of coming to your particular organization?
There's a lot of discussion about trying to attract younger people into the government. So I want to ask you about Gen Z. What are they looking for in a job? How do you make federal service appealing to them?
Definitely, it's the mission. It's amazing, how the generation right now really wants to impact change. They really want to see movement on things, but they really want to feel like they are producing value that's impacting people. And so whether or not they go work at Google or not, that is some of the driver. So when you look at folks that want to come to public sector, missions are everywhere, So there's such an opportunity there. So really understanding and being able to articulate how they will fit in that mission and the great potential they have for not just, even if you're joining being a financial analyst, you're going to finance path, a back office function, really being able to articulate how that leads to impact for the mission and the impact for the folks that are getting the benefits for the mission. The other thing that they're also really looking for is, it's the ways of working. They don't want to waste time. So you really having something that's really technology enabled is really important. But then also really they want to collaborate around moments that matter. They just don't want to come to a building and sit because that's what you do for this job. And so figuring out those moments that matter. And there's, of course, some missions where people, in that example, need to be there every day. But that's really important, is figuring out what those moments that matter are and really building an environment where you can bring in that younger talent and they can see the value because it's all focused on those moments that matter in support of the mission and in support of the constituents.
Erica, the mission is great, and I know it's important to Gen Z, but they also need to pay their bills.
Yes, they do.
And they need to pay back student loans. So what do you say around non-monetary compensation as far as outside of that GS scale?
Definitely really looking at your rewards. So there are some interesting things you can do from a compensation perspective, but really pushing on the rewards piece. So tuition assistance will never get old, and really talking about that tuition assistance in the context of their whole person. That was really important. Things around health and wellness will always, always be very important. And then also things that really allow for them, even for their families, things that makes their quality of life better for their families is also something that really is motivating for people.
We started the conversation with that seismic event, the catalyst events that happened that the entire workforce needs to respond to. I wonder what you learned about the federal workforce as a result of the COVID pandemic.
Just being so proud of what they've accomplished. The agility is there, and a lot of folks think of government sometimes as just being static. Oh, no. So from that, it was clear that, yes, people can move quickly. They can think innovatively to make a change in how you are, going to continue service in a time where the service model completely is thrown out the window. So just that resiliency, the ability to innovate in a situation that you could never have actually expected. And then also what we're also seeing is radical interdependency. People are working together more and talking more across more disciplines, because before I think people were a little siloed, but with the pandemic, you had to work across everything, every team to fix stuff. And so that's also been cool to see how that's impacting just how they partner on stuff to solve their missions problems.
So finally, Erica, I want to ask you, if an agency professional, an HR official in an agency is inspired by all this and wants to make a change, where do they start? What's the first thing?
When you're thinking about civil service transformation, because that's what it is, they want to figure out how to improve the whole experience for their civil servants. One of the first things is really just to talk to others from the business and on the mission side and the leaders that are internal on the back office side. You just get a feel for what's going on with people and what's the problem, what's the challenge that you're trying to solve first, and then get a feel for which ones are the most important to solve and which ones, and just kind of racking and stacking them, right? So that would be the first piece. The other piece too would also really getting a sense and appreciating the data you already have. Organizations are sitting on so much powerful data. So if you can figure out a way to look at trends that have happened over the last several years, with candidates who declined opportunities, or people who've left that were unexpected, or just how the organization has performed, it's incredible how much you can glean from that can also help you what to prioritize.
Erica, nice to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching The Future of Civil Service, sponsored by EY. For more information on this topic, go to govmatters.tv/EY. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Geerges.